What a mess! It is a big mess, but we will figure it out. We will figure it out. Okay, I do sound like I have a bit of a frog in my throat today, but don't know why. Let's, but we will get on with it. Let's do it. The soul of number 13. Scarcely had the Ithaca cleared the reef, which lies almost across the mouth of the little harbour, where she had been moored for so many months, than the tempest broke upon her in all its terrific fury. Boudouin was no mean sailor, but he was short-handed, nor is it reasonable to suppose that, even with a full crew, he could have weathered the terrific gale which beat down upon the hapless vessel. Buffeted by great waves, and stripped of every shred of canvas by the force of the mighty wind that howled about her, the Ithaca drifted a hopeless wreck soon after the storm struck her. Below deck, the terrified girl clung desperately to a stanchion, as the stricken ship lunged sickeningly before the hurricane. "Good morning, Timo. Good morning. Good to see you." For half an hour the awful suspense endured, and then, with a terrific crash, the vessel struck, shivering and trembling from stem to stern. Virginia Maxon sank to her knees in prayer, for this, she thought, must surely be the end. On deck, Boudouin and his crew had lashed themselves to the masts, and as the Ithaca struck the reef before the harbour, back upon which she had been driven, the tall poles with their living freight snapped at the deck and went overboard, carrying everything with them, amid shrieks and cries of terror that were drowned and choked by the wild tumult of the night. Twice the girl felt the ship strike upon the reef, then a great wave caught and carried her high into the air, dropping her with a nauseating lunge which seemed to the imprisoned girl to be carrying the ship to the very bottom of the ocean. With closed eyes she clung in silent prayer beside her berth, waiting for the moment that would bring the engulfing waters and oblivion, praying that the end might come speedily and release her from the torture of nervous apprehension that had terrorized her for what seemed an eternity. After the last long dive, the Ithaca righted herself laboriously, wallowing drunkenly, but apparently upon an even keel, in less turbulent waters. One long minute dragged after another, yet no suffocating deluge poured in upon the girl, and presently she realized that the ship had, at least temporarily, weathered the awful buffeting of the savage elements. Now she felt but a gentle roll, though the wild turmoil of the storm still came to her ears through the heavy planking of the Ithaca's hull. Yeah, yeah. There's only a handful of people here today, Timo. Yeah. Normally there'd be 10 or so. Just a couple here today. I'm sure more will pop in. For a long hour she lay wondering what fate had overtaken the vessel, and whither she had been driven, and then, with a gentle grinding sound, the ship stopped, swung around, and finally came to rest, with a slight list to starboard. The wind howled about her, the torrential rain beat loudly upon her, but, except for a slight rocking, the ship lay quiet. Hours passed. Wow, I got something stuck in my throat. 1 second. There we go. Hopefully that'll do the trick. It's, what's that, 8 o'clock where you are? Wow, okay. That's Eastern European time. You live in Kazakhstan, right? I think that's where you said you came from. It is late at night. It's 10 o'clock in the morning here. Blip, blip, blip. Okay. The wind howled about her. The torrential rain beat loudly upon her, but except for a slight rocking, the ship lay quiet. Hours passed with no other sounds than those of the rapidly waning tempest. The girl heard no signs of life upon the ship. Her curiosity became more and more keenly aroused. She had that indefinable, intuitive feeling that she was utterly alone upon the vessel, and at length, unable to endure the inaction and uncertainty longer, made her way to the companion ladder, where for half an hour she futilely attempted to remove the hatch. As she worked, she failed to hear the scraping of naked bodies clambering over the ship's side, or the padding of unshod feet upon the deck above her. She was about to give up her work at the hatch when the heavy wooden cover suddenly commenced to move above her, as though actuated by some supernatural power. Fascinated, the girl stood gazing in wide-eyed astonishment as one end of the hatch rose higher and higher until a little patch of blue sky revealed the fact that morning had come. Then the cover slid suddenly back, and Virginia Maxon found herself looking into a savage and terrible face. The dark skin was creased in fierce wrinkles about the eyes and mouth. Gleaming tiger cat's teeth curved upward from holes pierced to receive them in the upper half of each ear. The slit earlobes supported heavy rings whose weight had stretched the skin until the long loop rested upon the brown shoulders. The filed and blackened teeth behind the loose lips added the last touch of hideousness to this terrible countenance. Nor was this all. A score of equally ferocious faces peered down from behind the foremost. With a little scream, Virginia Maxon sprang back to the lower deck and ran toward her stateroom. Behind her she heard the commotion of many men descending the companionway. As number 13 came into the campong, after that's the big change of pace right here. We're leaving her alone, back to number 13. As number 13 came into the campong, after quitting the bungalow, his heart was a chaos of conflicting emotions. His little world had been wiped out. His creator, the man whom he thought his only friend and benefactor, had suddenly turned against him. The beautiful creature he worshipped was either lost or dead. Synge had said so. He was nothing but a miserable thing. There was no place in the world for him, and even should he again find Virginia Maxon, he had von Horn's word for it that she would shrink from him and loathe him even more than another. With no plans and no hopes, he walked aimlessly through the blinding rain, oblivious of it, and of the vivid lightning and deafening thunder. The palisade at length brought him to a sudden stop. Mechanically he squatted on his haunches with his back against it, and there, in the midst of the fury of the storm, he conquered the tempest that raged in his own breast. The murder that rose again and again in his untaught heart he forced back by thoughts of the sweet, pure face of the girl whose image he had set up in the inner temple of his being as a gentle, guiding divinity. "He made me without a soul," he repeated over and over again to himself. "But I have found a soul. She shall be my soul. Von Horn could not explain to me what a soul is. He does not know. None of them knows. I am wiser than all the rest, for I have learned what a soul is. Eyes cannot see it. Fingers cannot feel it, but he who possesses it knows that it is there, for it fills his whole breast with a great, wonderful love and worship for something infinitely finer than man's dull senses can gauge, something that guides him into paths far above the plane of soulless beasts and bestial men. Let those who say I have no soul, for I am satisfied with the soul I have found. It would never permit me to inflict on others the terrible wrong that Professor Maxon has inflicted on me. Yet he never doubts his own possession of a soul. It would not allow me to revel in the coarse brutalities of von Horn, and I am sure that von Horn thinks he has a soul. And if the savage men who came tonight to kill have souls, then I am glad that my soul is after my own choosing. I would not care for one like theirs. That's a big section to be quoted like that. Right. The sudden equatorial dawn found the man still musing. The storm had ceased, and as the daylight brought the surroundings to view, number 13 became aware that he was not alone in the campong. All about him lay the 11 terrible men whom he had driven from the bungalow the previous night. The sight of them brought a realization of new responsibilities. To leave them here in the campong would mean the immediate death of Professor Maxon and Singh. To turn them into the jungle might mean a similar fate for Virginia Maxon, were she wandering about in search of the encampment. Number 13 could not believe that she was dead. It seemed too monstrous to believe that he should never see her again, and he knew so little of death that it was impossible for him to realize that that beautiful creature ever could cease to be filled with the vivacity of life. The young man had determined to leave the camp himself, partly on account of the cruel words Professor Maxon had hurled at him the night before, but principally in order that he might search for the lost girl. Of course, he had not the remotest idea where to look for her, but as Von Horn had explained that they were upon a small island, he felt reasonably sure that he should find her in time. As he looked at the sleeping monsters near him, he determined that the only solution of his problem was to take them all with him. Number 12 lay closest to him, and stepping to his side, he nudged him with the butt of the bullwhip he still carried. The creature opened his dull eyes. "Get up," said number 13. Number 12 rose, looking askance at the bullwhip. "We are not wanted here," said number 13. "I am going away, and you are all going with me. We shall find a place where we may live in peace and freedom. Are you not always tired of being penned up?" "Yes," replied number 12, still looking at the whip. "You need not fear the whip," said the young man. "I shall not use it on those who make no trouble. Wake the others, and tell them what I have said. All must come with me. Those who refuse shall feel the whip." Number 12 did as he was bid. The creatures mumbled among themselves for a few minutes. Finally, number 13 cracked his long whip to attract their attention. "Good morning, Rose. Good morning. Good to see you. How you doing?" Finally, number 13 cracked his long whip to attract their attention. "Come," he said. All right, so Virginia's been captured by headhunters on their yacht, and number 13 is rounding up the rest of the clones to get their little group together. "Come," he said. 9 of them shuffled after him as he turned toward the outer gate. Only number 10 and number 3 held back. The young man walked quickly to where they stood, eyeing him sullenly. The others halted to watch, ready to spring upon their new master should the tide of the impending battle turn against him. The 2 mutineers backed away snarling, their hideous features distorted in rage. "Come," repeated number 13. "We will stay here," growled number 10. "We have not yet finished with Maxon." A loop in the butt of the bullwhip was about the young man's wrist. Dropping the weapon from his hand, it still dangled by the loop. At the same instant, he launched himself at the throat of number 10, for he realized that a decisive victory now, without the aid of the weapon they all feared, would make the balance of his work easier. The brute met his charge with lowered head and outstretched hands, and in another second they were locked in a clinch, tearing at one another like 2 great gorillas. For a moment, number 3 stood watching the battle, and then he too sprang in to aid his fellow mutineer. Number 13 was striking heavy blows with his giant hands upon the face and head of his antagonist, while the long, uneven fangs of the latter had found his breast and neck half a dozen times. Blood covered them both. Number 3 threw his enormous weight into the conflict with the frenzy of a mad bull. Again and again he got a hold upon the young giant's throat, only to be shaken loose by the mighty muscles. The excitement of the conflict was telling upon the malformed minds of the spectators. Presently, one who was almost brainless, acting upon the impulse of suggestion, leaped in among the fighters, striking and biting at number 13. It was all that was needed. Another second found the whole monstrous crew upon the single man. His mighty strength availed him but little in the unequal conflict. 11 to 1 were too great odds even for those powerful thews. His great advantage lay in his superior intelligence, but even this seemed futile in the face of the enormous weight of numbers that opposed him. Time and again he had almost shaken himself free, only to fall once more, dragged down by hairy arms about his legs. Hither and thither about the campong the battle raged until the fighting mass rolled against the palisade, and here, at last, with his back to the structure, number 13 regained his feet, and with the heavy stock of the bullwhip beat off for a moment those nearest him. All were winded, but when those who were left of the 11 original antagonists drew back to regain their breath, the young giant gave them no respite, but leaped among them with the long lash they had such good reason to hate and fear. The result was as his higher intelligence had foreseen. The creatures scattered to escape the fury of the lash, and a moment later he had them at his mercy. About the campong lay 4 who had felt the full force of his heavy fist, while not one but bore some mark of the battle. Not a moment did he give them to recuperate after he had scattered them before the round. Not a moment did he give them to recuperate after he had scattered them before he. Okay, boy, okay, that's a separate clause right there. Okay, not a moment did he give them to recuperate after he had scattered them, before he rounded them up once more near the gate. But now they were docile and submissive. In pairs he ordered them to lift their unconscious comrades to their shoulders and bear them into the jungle, for number 13 was setting out into the world with his grim tribe in search of his lady-love. Good morning, Baghdad Money. Baghdad Money. How you doing? Good to see you. Once well within the jungle, they halted to eat of the more familiar fruit which had always formed the greater bulk of their sustenance. Thus refreshed, they set out once more after the leader, who wandered aimlessly beneath the shade of the tall jungle trees, amidst the gorgeous tropic blooms and gay songless birds. And of the 12, only the leader saw the beauties that surrounded them, or felt the strange, mysterious influence of the untracked world they trod. Chance took them toward the west, until presently they emerged upon the harbor's edge, where from the matted jungle they overlooked for the first time the waters of the little bay and the broader expanse of strait beyond, until their eyes rested at last upon the blurred lines of distant Borneo. And William's here as well. Good Lord. Boy, okay, people are piling in now. Good to see you all. Yeah. What's 13th? Oh, number 13. Number 13. I think Rose has maybe got a thing for number 13. I don't know. Again, until their eyes rested at last upon the blurred lines of distant Borneo. From other vantage points, at the jungle's border, 2 other watchers looked out upon the scene. One was the Lascar. Oh, okay. No, boy, this is a total change of scene right here as well. Tell that the formatting for this not so good. That should be like an actual big break. Okay, so we're okay. So we're changing to different characters now. We're leaving these guys behind. Okay. From other vantage points at the jungle's border, two other watchers looked out upon the scene. One was the Lascar whom von Horn had sent down to the Ithaca the night before, but who had reached the harbor after she sailed. The other was von Horn himself, and both were looking out upon the dismantled wreck of the Ithaca, where it lay in the sand near the harbor's southern edge. Caesar Army and Star was born at 1300. We need a little clarification there. Tell us about Caesar Army and Star. Neither ventured forth from his place of concealment, for beyond the Ithaca 10 prahus were pulling gracefully into the quiet waters of the basin. Raja Muda Safia, caught by the hurricane that the preceding night, as he had been about to beat across to Borneo, had scurried for shelter within one of the many tiny coves which indent the island's entire coast. It happened that his haven of refuge was but a short distance south of the harbor in which he knew the Ithaca to be moored, and in the morning he decided to pay that vessel a visit in the hope that he might learn something of advantage about the girl from one of her Lascar crew. The wily Malay had long refrained from pillaging the Ithaca, for fear such an act might militate against the larger villainy he purposed perpetrating against her white owner. But when he rounded the point and came in sight of the stranded wreck, he put all such thoughts from him, and made straight for the helpless hulk to glean whatever of salvage might yet remain within her battered hull. Back in Rome, and that's why you like 30. Oh, boy, okay, all right. I'm still a little in the dark there, Rose. The old rascal had little thought of the priceless treasure hidden beneath the Ithaca's clean-swept deck, as he ordered his savage henchmen up her sides, while he lay back upon his sleeping-mat beneath the canopy which protected his vice-regal head from the blistering tropic sun. Number 13 watched the wild headhunters with keenest interest as they clambered aboard the vessel. With von Horn he saw the evident amazement which followed the opening of the hatch, though neither guessed its cause. He saw the haste with which 6 of the warriors leaped down the companionway, and heard their savage shouts as they pursued their quarry within the bowels of the ship. A few minutes later they emerged, dragging a woman with them. Von Horn and Number 13 recognized the girl simultaneously, but the doctor, though he ground his teeth in futile rage, knew that he was helpless to avert the tragedy. Number 13 neither knew nor cared. "Come," he called to his grotesque horde, "kill the men and save the girl, the one with the golden hair." He added, as the sudden realization came to him that none of these creatures ever had seen a woman before. Then he dashed from the shelter of the jungle, across the beach and into the water, his fearful pack at his heels. The Ithaca lay now in about 5 feet of water, and the war prahus of Muda Safia rode upon her seaward side, so that those who manned them did not see the 12 who splashed through the water from land. Never before had any of the rescuers seen a larger body of water than the little stream which wound through their campong, but accidents and experiments in that had taught them the danger of submerging their heads. They could not swim, but all were large and strong, so that they were able to push their way rapidly through the water to the very side of the ship. Here they found difficulty in reaching the deck, but in a moment Number 13 had solved the problem by requiring one of the taller of his crew to stand close in by the ship while the others clambered upon his shoulders, and from there to the Ithaca's deck. Number 13 was the first to pull himself over the vessel's side, and as he did so he saw some 6 Dyaks preparing to quit her upon the opposite side. They were the last of the boarding party. The girl was nowhere in sight. Without waiting for his men, the young giant sprang across the deck. His one thought was to find Virginia Maxon. At the sound of his approach, the Dyak turned, and at the sight of a pajama-clad white man armed with only a long whip, they emitted savage cries of anticipation, counting the handsome trophy upon the white one's shoulders as already theirs. Number 13 would have paid no attention whatever to them had they not molested him, for he wished only to reach the girl's side as quickly as possible, but in another moment he found himself confronted by a half-dozen dancing wild men, brandishing wicked-looking parangs and crying tauntingly. Up went the great bullwhip, and without abating his speed, Up went the great bullwhip, and without abating his speed a particle, the man leaped into the midst of the wicked blades that menaced him. Right and left, with the quickness of thought, the heavy lash fell upon heads, shoulders, and sword arms. There was no chance to wield a blade in the face of that terrific onslaught, for the whip fell, not with the ordinary force of a man-lash, but with all the stupendous power of those giant shoulders and arms behind it. Good morning, future pilot. Good morning. How you doing? A single blow felled the foremost headhunter, breaking his shoulder and biting into the flesh and bone as a heavy sword bites. Again and again the merciless leather fell, while in the boats below, Mudasafir and his men shouted loud cries of encouragement to their companions on the ship, and a wide-eyed girl in the stern of Mudasafir's own prahu looked on in terror, hope, and admiration at the man of her own race whom she felt was battling against all these odds for her alone. Virginia Maxon recognized her champion instantly as he who had fought for her and saved her once before from the hideous creature of her father's experiments. With hands tight pressed against her bosom, the girl leaned forward, tense with excitement, watching every move of the lithe giant figure, as, silhouetted against the brazen tropic sky, it towered above the dancing, shrieking headhunters who writhed beneath the awful lash. Mudasafir saw that the battle was going against his men, and it filled him with anger. Turning to one of his headmen, he ordered 2 more boatloads of warriors to the Ithaca's deck. As they were rushing to obey their leader's command, there was a respite in the fighting on the ship, for the 3 who had not fallen beneath the bullwhip had leaped overboard to escape the fate which had overtaken their comrades. As the reinforcements started to scale the vessel's side, Number 13's searching eyes found the girl in Mudasafir's prahu, where it lay a little off from the Ithaca. And as the first of the enemy clambered over the rail, she saw a smile of encouragement light the clear-cut features of the man above her. Virginia Maxon sent back an answering smile, a smile that filled the young giant's heart with pride and happiness, such a smile as brave men have been content to fight and die for since woman first learned the art of smiling. That is fantastic. The woman first learned the art of smiling. All righty. Number 13 could have beaten back many of the reinforcing party before they reached the deck, but he did not care to do so. In the spontaneous ethics of the man, there seemed no place for an unfair advantage over an enemy. And added to this was his newly acquired love of battle, so he was content to wait until his foes stood on an even footing with him before he engaged them. But they never came within reach of his ready lash. Instead, as they came above the ship's side, they paused, wide-eyed and terror-stricken, and with cries of fear and consternation, dropped precipitately back into the sea, shouting warnings to those who were about to scale the hull. Mudasafir arose in his prahu, cursing and reviling the frightened Dyaks. He did not know the cause of their alarm, but presently he saw it behind the giant upon the Ithaca's deck. 11 horrible monstrosities lumbering forward, snarling and growling to their leader's side. At the sight, his own dark countenance went ashen, and with trembling lips he ordered his oarsmen to pull for the open sea. The girl, too, saw the frightful creatures that surrounded the man upon the deck. She thought that they were about to attack him, and gave a little cry of warning, but in another instant she realized that they were his companions, for with him they rushed to the side of the ship to stand for a moment, looking down upon the struggling Dyaks in the water below. 2 prahus lay directly beneath them, and into these the head-hunters were scrambling. The balance of the flotilla were now making rapid headway under oars and sail toward the mouth of the harbor, and as number 13 saw that the girl was being borne away from him, he shouted a command to his misshapen crew, and without waiting to see if they would follow him, leaped into the nearer of the 2 boats beneath. It was already half filled with Dyaks, some of whom were hastily manning the oars. Others of the head-hunters were scrambling over the gunwale. In an instant pandemonium reigned in the little vessel. Savage warriors sprang toward the tall figure towering above them. Parangs flashed. The bullwhip hissed and cracked, and then into the midst of it all came a horrid avalanche of fearful and grotesque monsters. The young giant's crew had followed at his command. The battle in the prahu was short and fierce. For an instant the Dyaks attempted to hold their own, but in the face of the snarling, rending horde that engulfed them, terror got the better of them all, so that those who were not overcome dived overboard and swam rapidly toward shore. The other prahu had not waited to assist its companion, but before it was entirely filled had gotten under way, and was now rapidly overhauling the balance of the fleet. Von Horn had been an excited witness to all that had occurred upon the tranquil bosom of the little harbor. He had been filled... Oh, okay, this is changing perspective again. Okay, so now we're with Von Horn, who's not at the battle, just watching. Von Horn had been an excited witness to all that had occurred upon the tranquil bosom of the little harbor. He had been filled with astonishment at sight of the inhabitants of the Court of Mystery fighting under the leadership of number 13, and now he watched interestedly the outcome of the adventure. The sight of the girl being borne away in the prahu of the Malay Rajah to a fate worse than death had roused in him both keen regret and savage rage, but it was the life of ease that he was losing that concerned him most. He had felt so sure of winning Professor Maxon's fortune through either a forced or voluntary marriage with the girl, that his feelings now were as of one whose rightful heritage had been foully wrested from him. The thought of the girl's danger and suffering were of but secondary consideration to him, for the man was incapable of either deep love or true chivalry. Quite the contrary were the emotions which urged on the soulless creature who now found himself in undisputed possession of a Dyak war prahu. His only thought was of the girl being rapidly borne away across the glimmering waters of the strait. He knew not to what dangers she was exposed, or what fate threatened her. All he knew was that she had been taken by force against her will. He had seen the look of terror in her eyes, and the dawning hope die out as the boat that carried her had turned rapidly away from the Ithaca. His one thought now was to rescue her from her abductors and return her to her father. Of his own reward or profit he entertained no single thought. It was enough if he could fight for her. That would be reward sufficient. Number 13, nor any of his crew, had ever before seen a boat, and outside of the leader there was scarcely enough brains in the entire party to render it at all likely that they could even navigate it. But the young man saw that the other prahus were being propelled by the long sticks which protruded from their sides, and he also saw the sails bellying with wind, though he had but a vague conception of their purpose. For a moment he stood watching the actions of the men in the nearest boat, and then he set himself to the task of placing his own men at the oars and instructing them in the manner of wielding the unfamiliar implements. For an hour he worked with the brainless things that constituted his party. He could not seem to learn what was required of them, or they could not. They could not seem to learn what was required of them. The paddles were continually fouling one another, or being merely dipped into the water and withdrawn without the faintest semblance of a stroke made. The tiresome manoeuvring had carried them about in circles back and forth across the harbour, but by it Number 13 had himself learned something of the proper method of propelling and steering his craft. At last, more through accident than intent, they came opposite the mouth of the basin, and then chance did for them what days of arduous endeavour upon their part might have failed to accomplish. As they hung wavering in the opening, the broad strait before them, and their quarry fast diminishing to small specks upon the distant horizon, a vagrant land breeze suddenly bellied the flapping sail. The prahu swung quickly about with nose pointed toward the sea, the sail filled, and the long, narrow craft shot out of the harbour and sped on over the dancing waters in the wake of her sisters. On shore behind them, the infuriated Dyaks, who had escaped to the beach, danced and shrieked. Von Horn, from his hiding-place, looked on in surprised wonder, and Bududrin's Lascar cursed the fate that had left a party of 40 head-hunters upon the same small island with him. Smaller and smaller grew the retreating prahu, as straight as an arrow she sped toward the dim outline of verdure-clad Borneo. Man! The action just does not stop. And that's the end of chapter 8. Good Lord. Good gracious. It's, yeah. All right. Yeah, so, boy, so we got some, some old but familiar faces here. Future pilots popped on in. Bagged that money popping on in. Yeah. Remember these guys from back in the old mixer days? Yeah. Anya is lurking. Very good. It's good to see. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to pop back into our thing in just a minute. Oh my goodness. This book is actually really, really fun. But boy, oh boy, there's some problematic areas in it. That's for sure, though. It's a lot of fun, though. A lot of fun. Don't forget if you are liking this, you can give the stream a little one of them thumbs up there. You know how that goes. And there's also a share stream button below the video. You can let your friends know about the things that you like. Yeah, we can do that. Liked and shared, says Melissa. There we go. Melissa's so good like that. Thank you. All right. Let's get back into chapter 9. Chapter 9. Into savage Borneo. Von Horn cursed the chance that had snatched the girl from him, but he tried to content himself with the thought that the treasure probably still rested in the cabin of the Ithaca, where Bududrin was to have deposited it. He wished that the Dyaks would take themselves off so that he could board the vessel and carry the chest ashore to bury it against the time that fate should provide a means for transporting it to Singapore. In the water below him floated the Ithaca's masts, their grisly burdens still lashed to their wave-swept sides. Bududrin lay there, his contorted features set in one of a horrible grimace of death, which grinned up at the man he would have cheated, as though conscious of the fact that the white man would have betrayed him had the opportunity come, the while he enjoyed in anticipation the other's disappointment in the loss of both the girl and the treasure. Up and shared. It is a fun book. It is a fun book. Okay, Rose is going AFK. That's all good. She's got work to do. Thank you. Bag that money. You got it shared as well. Thanks. Thank you. The tide was rising now, and presently the Ithaca began to float. No sooner was it apparent that she was free than the Dyaks sprang into the water and swam to her side. Like monkeys, they scrambled aboard, swarming below deck in search, thought Von Horn, of pillage. He prayed that they would not discover the chest. Presently, a half-dozen of them leaped overboard and swam to the mass of tangled spars and rigging which littered the beach. Selecting what they wished, they returned to the vessel, and a few minutes later von Horn was chagrined to see them stepping a jury-mast. He thought the treasure lay in the Ithaca's cabin. Before dark, the vessel moved slowly out of the harbor, setting a course across the strait in the direction that the war prahus had taken. When it was apparent that there was no danger that the headhunters would return, the Lascar came from his hiding place, and dancing up and down upon the shore, screamed warlike challenges and taunts at the retreating enemy. Von Horn also came forth, much to the sailors' surprise, and in silence the two stood watching the disappearing ship. At length they turned, and made their way up the stream toward camp. There was no longer aught to fear there. Von Horn wondered if the creatures he had loosed upon Professor Maxon had done their work before they left, or if they had all turned to mush, as had number 13. Once at the encampment, his questions were answered, for he saw a light in the bungalow, and as he mounted the steps, there were Singh and Professor Maxon just coming from the living-room. The professor. Von Horn, exclaimed the professor. You, then, are not dead, but where is Virginia? Tell me that she is safe. She has been carried away, was the startling answer. Your creatures, under the thing you wish to marry her to, have taken her to Borneo, with a band of Malay and Dayak pirates. I was alone, and could do nothing to prevent them. "Oh, God," moaned the old man, "why did I not kill the thing when it stood within my power to do so? Only last night he was here beside me, and now it is too late." "I warned you," said von Horn coldly. "I was mad," retorted the professor. "Could you not see that I was mad? Oh, why did you not stop me? You were sane enough. You, at least, might have forced me to abandon the insane obsession which has overpowered my reason for all these terrible months. I'm sane now, but it is too late. Too late." "Both you and your daughter could only have interpreted any such action on my part as instigated by self-interest, for you both knew that I wanted to make her my wife," replied the other. "My hands were tied." "Oh, no, still him. My hands were tied. I'm sorry now that I did not act, but you can readily see the position in which I was placed." "Can nothing be done to get her back?" cried the father. "There must be some way to save her. Do it, von Horn, and not only is my daughter yours, but my wealth as well. Everything I possess shall be yours if you will but save her from those frightful creatures." "The Ithaca is gone, too," replied the doctor. "There is only a small boat that I hid in the jungle for some such emergency. It will carry us to Borneo, but what can we four do against 500 pirates and the dozen monsters you have brought into the world? No, Professor Maxon, I fear there is little hope, though I am willing to give my life in an attempt to save Virginia. You will not forget your promise should we succeed?" "No, doctor," replied the old man. "I swear that you shall have Virginia as your wife, and all my property shall be made over to you if she is rescued." You can't just give people away like that. All right. Sing Lee had been a silent listener to this strange conversation. So there's some dated stuff going on here. All right. Just going to point that out. Sing Lee had been a silent listener to this strange conversation. An odd look came into his eyes as he heard von Horn exact a confirmation from the professor, but what passed in his shrewd mind only he could say. It was too late to attempt to make a start that day for Borneo, as darkness had already fallen. Professor Maxon and von Horn walked over. Well, how were they? They don't even have a boat. It was too late to attempt to make a start that day for Borneo. But there are no boats. There's nothing. They don't have a way to get there, as darkness had already fallen, and they had no boat. Professor Maxon and von Horn walked over to the workshop and the inner campong to ascertain what damage had been done there. On their return, Singh was setting the table on the veranda for the evening meal. The two men were talking, and without making his presence noticeable, Sing Lee hovered about, ever within earshot. "I cannot make it out, Von Horn," Professor Maxon was saying. "Not a board broken, and the doors both apparently opened intentionally by someone familiar with locks and bolts. Who could have done it?" "Oh, you forget number 13, suggested the doctor. "But the chest," expostulated the other. "What in the world would he want of that enormous and heavy chest?" "He might have thought it contained treasure," hazarded Von Horn in an innocent tone of voice. Rose would never give me away permanently. All right, fair enough. All right, fair enough." "He might have thought that it contained treasure," hazarded Von Horn in an innocent tone of voice. "Oh, bosh, my dear man," replied Professor Maxon. "He knew nothing of treasures or money, or the need or value of it either. I tell you the workshop was opened, and the inner campong, as well, by someone who knew the value of money and wanted that chest, but why they should have released the creatures from the inner enclosure is beyond me." "And I tell you, Professor Maxon, that it could have been none other than number 13, insisted Von Horn. "Did I not myself see him leading his 11 monsters as easily as a captain commands his company? The fellow is brighter than we have imagined. He's learned much from us both. He has reasoned, and he has shrewdly guessed many things that he could not have known through experience." "But his object?" asked the professor. "That is simple," returned Von Horn. "You have held out hopes to him that soon he should come to live under your roof with Virginia. The creature has been madly infatuated with her ever since the day he took her from number 1, and you have encouraged his infatuation until yesterday. Then you regained your sanity and put him in his rightful place. What is the result? Denied the easy prey he expected, he immediately decided to take it by force. And with that end in view, and taking advantage of the series of remarkable circumstances which played into his hands, he liberated his fellows, and with them hastened to the beach in search of Virginia, and in hopes of being able to fly with her upon the Ithaca. There he met the Malay pirates, and together they formed an alliance under terms of which number 13 is to have the girl, and the pirates the chest, in return for transporting him and his crew to Borneo." Wow. "Why, it is all perfectly simple and logical, Professor Maxon. Do you not see it now?" "You may be right, Doctor," answered the old man, "but it is idle to conjecture. Tomorrow we can be up and doing, so let us get what sleep we can tonight. We shall need all our energies if we are to save my poor dear girl from the clutches of that horrid soulless thing." At the very moment that he spoke, the object of his contumely, insolent or insulting language or treatment, archaic. Okay. At the very moment that he spoke, the object of his contumely. Oh, no. Okay, there should be a comma there. At the very moment that he spoke, the object of his contumely was entering the dark mouth of a broad river that flowed out of the heart of savage Borneo. In the prahu with him, his 11 hideous companions now bent to their paddles with slightly increased efficiency. Before them, the leader saw a fire blazing upon a tiny island in the center of the stream. Toward this they turned their silent way. Grimly the war prahu, with its frightful freight, nosed closer to the bank. At last number 13 made out the figures of men about the fire, and as they came still closer he was sure that they were members of the very party he had been pursuing across the broad waters for hours. The prahus were drawn up upon the bank, and the warriors were preparing to eat. Just as the young giant's prahu came within the circle of firelight, a swarthy Malay approached the fire, dragging a white girl roughly by the arm. No more was needed to convince number 13 of the identity of the party. With a low command to his fellows, he urged them to redoubled speed. At the same instant, a Dyak warrior caught sight of the approaching boat as it sped into the full glare of the light. At sight of the occupants, the headhunters scattered for their own prahus. The frightful aspect of the enemy turned their savage hearts to water, leaving no fight in their ordinarily warlike souls. So quickly they moved that as the pursuing prahu touched the bank, all the nearer boats had been launched, and the remaining pirates were scurrying across the little island for those which lay on the opposite side. Among these was the Malay who guarded the girl, but he had not been quick enough to prevent Virginia Maxon recognizing the stalwart figure standing in the bow of the oncoming craft. As he dragged her away toward the prahu of Muda Safia, she cried out to the strange white man, who seemed her self-appointed protector. "Help! Help!" she called. "This way, across the island." And then the brown hand of her jailer closed over her mouth. Like a tigress, she fought to free herself, or to detain her captor until the rescue party should catch up with them. But the scoundrel was muscled like a bull, and when the girl held back, he lifted her across his shoulder and broke into a run. Raja Muda Safia had no stomach for a fight himself, but he was loath to lose the prize he had but just won, and seeing that his men were panic-stricken, he saw no alternative but to rally them for a brief stand that would give the little moment required to slip away in his own prahu with the girl. Calling aloud for those around him to come to his support, he halted 50 yards from his boat, just as number 13, with his fierce, brainless horde, swept up from the opposite side of the island in the wake of him who bore Virginia Maxon. The old Rajah succeeded in gathering some 50 warriors about him from the crews of the 2 boats which lay near his. His own men he hastened to their posts in his prahu, that they might be ready to pull swiftly away the moment that he and the captive were aboard. The Dyak warriors presented an awe-inspiring spectacle in the fitful light of the nearby campfire. The ferocity of their fierce faces was accentuated by the upturned, bristling tiger cat's teeth which protruded from every ear, while the long feathers of the Argus pheasant waving from their war-caps, the brilliant colors of their war-coats trimmed with the black and white feathers of the hornbill, and the strange devices upon their gaudy shields, but added to the savagery of their appearance as they danced and howled, menacing and intimidating, in the path of the charging foe. A single backward glance was all that Virginia Maxon found it possible to throw in the direction of the rescue party, and in that she saw a sight that lived forever in her memory. At the head of his misshapen pack sprang the stalwart young giant straight into the heart of the flashing parangs of the howling savages. To right and left fell the mighty bullwhip, cutting down men with all the force and dispatch of a steel saber. The Dyaks, encouraged by the presence of Muda Safia in their rear, held their ground, and the infuriated, brainless things that followed the wielder of the bullwhip threw themselves upon the head-hunters with beating hands and rending fangs. Number 10 wrested a parang from an adversary, and acting upon his example, the other creatures were not long in arming themselves in a similar manner. Cutting and jabbing, they hewed their way through the solid ranks of the enemy, until Muda Safia, seeing that defeat was inevitable, turned and fled towards his prahu. 4 of his creatures lay dead, as the last of the Dyaks turned to escape from the mad white man, who faced naked steel with only a rawhide whip. In panic, the headhunters made a wild dash for the 2 remaining prahus, for Muda Safia had succeeded in getting away from the island in safety. Number 13 reached the water's edge, but after a moment... Number 13 reached the water's edge, but a moment after the prow of the Rajah's craft had cleared the shore and was swinging upstream. No, that doesn't make... No. Let's see. Okay, boy. Number 13 reached the water's edge but a moment after the prow of the Rajah's craft had cleared the shore and was swinging upstream under the vigorous strokes of its 50 oarsmen. For an instant he stood poised upon the bank, as though to spring after the retreating prahu, but the knowledge that he could not swim held him back. It was useless to throw away his life when the need of it was so great if Virginia Maxon was to be saved. Turning to the other prahus, he saw that one was already launched, but that the crew of the other was engaged in a desperate battle with the 7 remaining members of his crew for possession of the boat. Leaping among the combatants, he urged his fellows aboard the prahu, which was already half filled with Dyaks. Then he shoved the boat out into the river, jumping aboard himself as its prow cleared the gravelly beach. For several minutes that long, hollowed log was a veritable floating hell of savage, screaming men locked in deadly battle. The sharp harangues of the head-hunters were no match for the superhuman muscles of the creatures that battered them about, now lifting one high above his fellows and using the body as a club to beat down those nearby, again snapping an arm or a leg as one might break a pipe stem, or hurling a living antagonist headlong above the heads of his fellows to the dark waters of the river. And above them all, in the thickest of the fight, towering even above his own giants, rose the mighty figure of the terrible white man, whose very presence wrought havoc with the valor of the brown warriors. 2 more of number 13's creatures had been cut down in the prahu, but the loss among the Dyaks had been infinitely greater, and to it was now added the desertions of the terror-stricken savages, who seemed to fear the frightful countenances of their adversaries even as much as they did their prowess. There remained but a handful of brown warriors in one end of the boat, when the advantage of utilizing their knowledge of the river and of navigation occurred to number 13. Calling to his men, he commanded them to cease killing, making prisoners of those who remained instead. So accustomed had his pack now become to receiving and acting upon his orders that they changed their tactics immediately, and one by one the remaining Dyaks were overpowered, disarmed, and held. With difficulty number 13 communicated with them, for among them there was but a single warrior who had ever had intercourse with an Englishman. But at last, by means of signs and the few words that were common to them, but at last by means of signs and the few words that were common to them both, he made the native understand that he would spare the lives of himself and his companions if they would help him in pursuit of Muda Safia and the girl. The Dyaks felt but little loyalty for the rascally Malay they served, since in common with all their kind, they and theirs had suffered for generations at the hands of the cruel, crafty, and unscrupulous race that had usurped the administration of their land. Okay. So it was not difficult to secure from them the promise of assistance in return for their lives. Number 13 noticed that when they addressed him it was always as Bulan, and upon questioning them he discovered that they had given him this title of honor partly in view of his wonderful fighting ability, and partly because the sight of his white face emerging from out of the darkness of the river into the firelight of their blazing campfire had carried to their impressionable minds a suggestion of the tropic moon, which they admired and reverenced. Both the name and the idea appealed to number 13, and from that time he adopted Bulan as his rightful cognomen. All right. The loss of time resulting from the fight in the prahu and the ensuing peace parley permitted Muda Safia to put considerable distance between himself and his pursuers. The Malay's boat was now alone, for of the 8 prahus that remained of the original fleet, it was the only one which had taken this branch of the river, the others having scurried into a smaller southerly arm after the fight upon the island, that they might the more easily escape their hideous foemen. Only Barunda, the headman, knew which channel Raja Muda Safia intended following, and Muda wondered why it was that the two boats that were to have borne Barunda's men did not catch up with his. While he had left Barunda and his warriors engaged in battle with the strangers, he did not for an instant imagine that they would suffer any severe loss, and that one of their boats should be captured was beyond belief. But this was precisely what had happened, and the second boat, seeing the direction taken by the enemy, had turned downstream, the more surely to escape them. So it was that while Raja Muda Safir moved leisurely up the river toward his distant stronghold, waiting for the other boats of his fleet to overtake him, Barunda, the headman, guided the white enemy swiftly after him. Barunda had discovered that it was the girl alone this white man wanted. Evidently, he either knew nothing of the treasure chest lying in the bottom of Muda Safir's boat, or knowing, was indifferent. In either event, Barunda thought that he saw a chance to possess himself of the rich contents of the heavy box, and so served his new master with much greater enthusiasm than he had the old. You know what? No one has actually taken a look inside the box. Everyone just knows that it's heavy, and but we've never it's never been described what's in the box. It's some even with Professor Maxon, when he was promising. Yeah, I don't know. It is a mystery. I would not be at all surprised if it turns out to have like something. I don't know, maybe just of sentimental value or so, but not like not stuffed with gold or something like that. I don't know. Because they've spent so much time gloating over this heavy chest, the locked chest. I don't know. You think number 14's hiding inside it? It could be. I mean, it could be anything in there, really. I don't know. All right. Yeah. Let's see where we at. Blah 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 blah. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Yes. So now Barunda is now serving number 13. Beneath the paddles of the natives and the 5 remaining members of his pack, Bulan, number 13, sped up the dark river after the single prahu with its priceless freight. Already 6 of the creatures of Professor Maxon's experience. Already 6 of the creatures of Professor Maxon's experiments had given up their lives in the service of his daughter, and the remaining 6 were pushing forward through the inky blackness of the jungle night into the untracked heart of savage Borneo to rescue her from her abductors, though they sacrificed their own lives in the endeavor. He keeps putting savage before Borneo as well. It's always savage Borneo. Far ahead of him, in the bottom of the great prahu, crouched the girl they sought. Her thoughts were of the man she felt intuitively to possess the strength, endurance, and ability to overcome every obstacle and reach her at last. Would he come in time? Ah, that was the question. The mystery of the stranger appealed to her. 1,000 times she had attempted to solve the question of his first appearance on the island, at the very moment that his mighty muscles were needed to rescue her from the horrible creature of her father's creation. Then there was his unaccountable disappearance for weeks. There was von Horn's strange reticence and seeming ignorance as to the circumstances which brought the young man to the island, or his equally unaccountable disappearance after having rescued her from number 1. And now, when she suddenly found herself in need of protection, here was the same young man, turning up in a most miraculous fashion, and at the head of the terrible creatures of the inner campong. The riddle was too deep for her. She's not very smart. She could not solve it, and then her thoughts were interrupted by the thin brown hand of Raja Muda Savia as it encircled her waist and drew her toward him. Upon the evil lips were hot words of passion. The girl wrenched herself from the man's embrace, and with a little scream of terror sprang to her feet, and as Muda Safia arose to grasp her again, she struck him full in the face with one small clenched fist. Directly behind the Malay lay the heavy chest of Professor Maxon. As the man stepped backward to recover his equilibrium, both feet struck the obstacle. For an instant he tottered with wildly waving arms in an endeavor to regain his lost balance. Then, with a curse upon his lips, he lunged across the box and over the side of the prahu into the dark waters of the river. Man. Oh, yeah, it's, boy, yeah, she's, I mean, yeah, all the dots are there. All the dots are there. It shouldn't be that hard to, and they're all numbered. All the dots are numbered, too. Literally numbered. That's, it makes it pretty easy for a connect the dots. Man. Okay. And once again, it's just the box, Professor Maxon's box, tripping up Muda Safia. Man. I'm actually very curious now. I'm very curious what's in the box. Okay, boy, a little sip of water here. Boy, we're 60%. Wow, we're making pretty good progress. Pretty good progress. What's this? What is that? That is... Oh, no, that's fine. Okay, let's, yeah, get a little sip of water there. We'll get back. So what time is it? It's 11 past? Yeah, we've got time easily for one more chapter. Maybe two. Maybe two. All right. My goodness. Okay. Boy, gotta wet that whistle. Woo. Okay. Chapter 10. Desperate Chance. The great chest in the bottom of Raja Muda Safia's prahu had awakened in other hearts, as well as his, blind greed and avarice, so that as it had been the indirect cause of his disaster, it now proved the incentive to another to turn the mishap to his own profit, and to the final undoing of the Malay. The Panglima Ninaka of the Signana Dayaks, what is it, the Panglima? I was going to look that up real fast. Panglima. No definition found. Okay. The Panglima Ninaka of the Signana Dayaks, who manned Muda Safia's war prahu, saw his chief disappear beneath the swift waters of the river, but the word of command that would have sent the boat hurriedly back to pick up the swimmer was not given. Instead, a lusty cry for greater speed ahead urged the sinuous muscles gliding beneath the sleek brown hides, and when Muda Safia rose to the surface with a cry for help upon his lips, Ninaka shouted back to him in derision, consigning his carcass to the belly of the nearest crocodile. In futile rage, Muda Safia called down the most terrible curses of Allah and his Prophet upon the head of Ninaka and his progeny to the 5th generation, and upon the shades of his forefathers, and upon the grim skulls which hung from the rafters of his longhouse. Then he turned and swam rapidly toward the shore. Ninaka, now in possession of both the chest and the girl, was rich indeed, but with Muda Safia dead, he scarce knew to whom he could dispose of the white girl for a price that would make it worth while to be burdened with the danger and responsibility of retaining her. He had some experience of white men in the past, and knew that dire were the punishments meted to those who wronged the white man's women. All through the remainder of all through the long night, Nanaka pondered the question deeply. At last he turned to Virginia. Oh, and he speaks English, all right. Why does the big white man who leads the orangutans, it's going to be orangutans. Why does the big white man who leads the orangutans follow us? He asked. Is it the chest he desires, or you? Oh, it's certainly not the chest, replied the girl. He wishes to take me back to my father, that is all. If you will return me to him, you may keep the chest, if that's what you wish. Nanaka looked at her quizzically for a moment. Evidently, then, she was of some value. Possibly, should he retain her, he could wring a handsome ransom from the white man. He would wait and see if it were always an easy matter to rid himself of her. Should circumstances require. No one wants the box? There's been a lot of fighting over it. A lot of fighting over that box. He would wait and see. It were always an easy matter to rid himself of her should circumstances require. The river was there, deep, dark, and silent, and he could place the responsibility for her loss upon Muda Sophia. Shortly after daybreak, Nanaka beached his prahu before the longhouse of a peaceful river tribe. The chest he hid in the underbrush close by his boat, and with the girl ascended the notched log that led to the veranda of the structure, while stretching away for 300 yards upon its tall piles, resembled a huge centipede. Yeah. Don't worry. It all comes off tomorrow, don't you worry. The dwellers in the longhouse extended every courtesy to Nanaka and his crew. At the former's request, Virginia was hidden away in a dark sleeping closet in one of the windowless living rooms which opened along the veranda for the full length of the house. Here a native girl brought her food and water, sitting while she ate in rapt contemplation of the white skin and golden hair of the strange female. At about the time that Nanaka pulled his prahu upon the beach before the longhouse, Muda Sophia, from the safety of the concealing underbrush upon the shore, saw a familiar war prahu forging rapidly up the stream. As it approached him, he was about to call aloud to those who manned it, for in the bow he saw a number of his own men. But a second glance, as the boat came opposite him, caused him to alter his intention and drop further into the engulfing verdure, for behind his men squatted 5 of the terrible monsters that had wrought such havoc with his expedition, and in the stern he saw his own Barunda in friendly converse with the mad white man who had led them. As the boat disappeared about a bend in the river, Raja Muda Sophia arose, shaking his fist in the direction it had vanished, and cursing anew and volubly, damned every separate hair in the heads of the faithless Barunda and the traitorous Nanaka. Then he resumed his watch for the friendly prahu, or smaller sampan, which he knew time would eventually bring from up or down the river to his rescue. For who of the surrounding natives would dare refuse succor to the powerful Raja of Sakhan? At the longhouse which harbored Nanaka and his crew, Barunda and Bulan stopped with theirs to obtain food and rest. The quick eye of the Dayak chieftain recognized the prahu of Raja Muda Sophia, where it lay upon the beach, but he said nothing to his white companion of what it augured. It might be well to discover how the land lay before he committed himself too deeply to either faction. At the top of the notched log he was met by Nanaka, who with horror-wide eyes looked down upon the fearsome monstrosities that lumbered awkwardly up the rude ladder in the wake of the agile Dyaks and the young white giant. "What does it mean?" whispered the Panglima to Barunda. These are now my friends. Where is Muda Sophia? Nanaka jerked his thumb toward the river. Some crocodile has feasted well, he said significantly. Barunda smiled. And the girl, he continued, and the treasure? Nanaka's eyes narrowed. They are safe, he answered. The white man wants the girl, remarked Barunda. He does not suspect you are one of Muda Sophia's people. If he guessed that you knew the whereabouts of the girl, he would torture the truth from you and then kill you. He does not care for the treasure. There is enough in that great chest for two, Nanaka. Let us be friends. Together we can divide it. Otherwise neither of us will get any of it. What do you say, Nanaka? The Panglima scowled. He did not relish the idea of sharing his prize, but he was shrewd enough to realize that Barunda possessed the power to rob him of it all. So at last he acquiesced, though with poor grace. Bulan had stood near during this conversation, unable, of course, to understand a single word of the native tongue. "What does the man say?" he asked Barunda. "Has he seen anything of the prahu bearing the girl?" "Yes," replied the Dyak. "He says that 2 hours ago such a war prahu passed on its way upriver. He saw the white girl plainly. Also he knows whither they are bound, and how, by crossing through the jungle on foot, you may intercept them at their next stop." Bulan, suspecting no treachery, was all anxiety to be off at once. Barunda suggested that in case of some possible emergency causing the quarry to return down the river, it would be well to have a force remain at the longhouse to intercept them. He volunteered to undertake the command of this party. Nanaka, he said, would furnish guides to escort Bulan and his men through the jungle to the point at which they might expect to find Muda Sophia. And so, with the girl he sought lying within 50 feet of him, Bulan started off through the jungle, with 2 of Nanaka's Dyaks as guides who had been well instructed by their Panglima as to their duties. Twisting and turning through the dense maze of underbrush and close-growing, lofty trees, the little party of 8 plunged farther and farther into the bewildering labyrinth. For hours the tiresome march was continued, until at last the guides halted, apparently to consult each other as to the proper direction. By signs they made known to Bulan that they did not agree upon the right course to pursue from there on, and that they had decided that it would be best for each to advance a little way in the direction he thought the right one, while Bulan and his 5 creatures remained where they were. "We will go but a little way," said the spokesman, "and then we shall return and lead you in the proper direction." Bulan saw no harm in this, and without a shade of suspicion sat down upon a fallen tree, and watched his 2 guides disappear into the jungle in opposite directions. Once out of sight of the white man, the 2 turned back and met a short distance in the rear of the party they had deserted. In another moment they were headed for the longhouse from which they had started. It was fully an hour thereafter that doubts began to enter Bulan's head, and as the day dragged on he came to realize that he and his weird pack were alone and lost in the heart of a strange and tangled web of tropical jungle. No sooner had Bulan and his party disappeared in the jungle than Barunda and Nanaka made haste to embark with the chest and the girl and push rapidly on up the river toward the wild and inaccessible regions of the interior. Virginia Maxon's strong hope of succor had been gradually waning as no sign of the rescue party appeared as the day wore on. Somewhere behind her, upon the broad river, she was sure a long, narrow native prahu was being urged forward in pursuit, and that in command of it was the young giant who was now, never for a moment, absent from her thoughts. For hours she strained her eyes over the stern of the craft that was bearing her deeper and deeper into the wild heart of fierce Borneo. Not savage, fierce Borneo. On either shore they occasionally passed a native longhouse, and the girl could not help but wonder at the quiet and peace which reigned over these little settlements. It was as though they were passing along a beaten highway in the center of a civilized community. And yet she knew that the men who lolled upon the verandas, puffing indolently upon their cigarettes or chewing betel nut, were all headhunters, and that along the veranda rafters above them hung the grisly trophies of their prowess. Yet, as she glanced from them to her new captors, she could not but feel that she would prefer captivity in one of the settlements they were passing. There, at least, she might find an opportunity to communicate with her father, or be discovered by the rescue party as it came up the river. The idea grew upon her as the day advanced, until she spent the time in watching furtively for some means of escape, should they but touch the shore momentarily. And though they halted twice, her captors were too watchful to permit her the slightest opportunity for putting her plan into action. Borunda and Nanaka urged their men on, with brief rests all day, nor did they halt even after night had closed down upon the river. On the swift prahu sped up the winding channel, which had now dwindled to a narrow stream, at intervals rushing strongly between rocky walls with a current that tested the strength of the strong brown paddlers. Longhouses had become more and more infrequent, until for some time now no sign of human habitation had been visible. The jungle undergrowth was scantier, and the spaces between the boles of the forest trees more open. Virginia Maxon was almost frantic with despair as the utter helplessness of her position grew upon her. Each stroke of those slender paddles was driving her farther and farther from friends, or the possibility of rescue. Night had fallen, dark and impenetrable, and with it had come the haunting fears that creep in when the sun has deserted his guardian post. Borunda and Nanaka were whispering together in low gutturals, and to the girl's distorted and fear-excited imagination it seemed possible that she alone must be the subject of their plotting. The prahu was gliding through a stretch of comparatively quiet and placid water, where the stream spread out into a little basin just above a narrow gorge through which they had just forced their way by dint of the most laborious exertions on the part of the crew. Virginia watched the two men near her furtively. They were deeply engrossed in their conversation. Neither was looking in her direction. The backs of the paddlers were all toward her. Stealthily she rose to a stooping position on the boat's side. For a moment she paused, and then noiselessly dove overboard and disappeared beneath the black waves. It was the slight rocking of the prahu that caused Borunda to look suddenly about to discover the reason for the disturbance. For a moment neither of the men apprehended the girl's absence. Nanaka was the first to do so, and it was he who called loudly to the paddlers to bring the boat to a stop. Then they dropped down the river with the current, and paddled about above the gorge for half an hour. Oh boy, okay, so she's down in that crocodile-infested waters now. Man. It's a dangerous, okay. The moment that Virginia Maxon felt the waters close above her head, she struck out beneath the surface for the shore upon the opposite side to that toward which she had dived into the river. That's a weird sentence. The moment that Virginia Maxon felt the waters close above her head, she struck out beneath the surface for the shore upon the opposite side to that toward which she had dived into the river. She knew that if any had seen her leave the prahu, they would naturally expect to intercept her on her way toward the nearest shore, and so she took this means of outwitting them, although it meant nearly double the distance to be covered. After swimming a short distance beneath the surface, the girl rose and looked up about her. Up the river, a few yards, she caught the phosphorescent gleam of water upon the prahu's paddles as they brought her to a sudden stop in obedience to Nanaka's command. Then she saw the dark mass of the war-craft drifting down toward her. Did it... Man. Well, it says it's reconnected. Need to double check that it has indeed reconnected. Okay, I think it is. Pretty sure it is. Okay, good. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, that's it seems to do that fairly regularly. Yeah, it did that yesterday as well. Don't like it. Where's let's take a look at my, am I dropping frames? Let me take a look. No dropped frames, it says. Who knows? All right. Blah blah blah. And I had a thing pop up saying OBS was disconnecting my streaming software, and then it reconnected. So don't know. Okay. Then she saw the dark mass of the warcraft drifting down toward her. Again she dove, and with strong strokes headed for the shore. The next time that she rose, she was terrified to see the prahu looming close behind her. The paddlers were propelling the boat slowly in her direction. It was almost upon her now. There was a shout from a man in the bow. She had been seen. Like a flash she dove once more, and turning, struck out rapidly straight back beneath the oncoming boat. When she came to the surface again, it was to find herself as far from shore as she had been when she first quitted the prahu, but the craft was now circling far below her, and she set out once again to retrace her way toward the inky mass of shoreline which loomed apparently near, and yet, as she knew, was some considerable distance from her. As she swam, her mind, filled with the terrors of the night, conjured recollection of the stories she had heard of the fierce crocodiles which infest certain of the rivers of Borneo. Again and again she could have sworn that she felt some huge, slimy body sweep beneath her in the mysterious waters of this unknown river. Behind her she saw the prahu turn back upstream, but now her mind was suddenly engaged with a new danger, for the girl realized that the strong current was bearing her downstream more rapidly than she had imagined. Already she could hear the increasing roar of the river as it rushed, wild and tumultuous, through the entrance to the narrow gorge below her. How far it was to shore she could not guess, or how far to the certain depth of the swirling waters toward which she was being drawn by irresistible force, but of one thing she was certain. Her strength was rapidly waning, and she must reach the bank quickly. With redoubled energy she struck out in one last mighty effort to reach the shore. The tug of the current was strong upon her, like a giant hand reaching up out of the cruel river to bear her back to death. She felt her strength ebbing quickly. Her strokes now were feeble and futile. With a prayer to her Maker, she threw her hands above her head in the last effort of the drowning swimmer to clutch at even thin air for support. The current caught and swirled her downward toward the gorge, and at the same instant her fingers touched and closed upon something which swung low above the water. With the last flickering spark of vitality that remained in her poor, exhausted body, Virginia Maxon clung to the frail support that a kind Providence had thrust into her hands. How long she hung there she never knew, but finally a little strength returned to her, and presently she realized that it was a pendant creeper hanging low from a jungle tree upon the bank that had saved her from the river's rapacious maw. Inch by inch she worked herself upward toward the bank, and at last, weak and panting, sunk exhausted to the cool carpet of grass that grew to the water's edge. Almost immediately tired, nature plunged her into a deep sleep. It was daylight when she awoke, dreaming that the tall young giant had rescued her from a band of demons and was lifting her in his arms to carry her back to her father. Through half-open eyes she saw the sunlight filtering through the leafy canopy above her. She wondered at the realism of her dream. Full consciousness returned, and with it the conviction that she was, in truth, being held close by strong arms against a bosom that throbbed to the throbbing of a real heart, throbbed to the beating of a real heart. With a sudden start, she opened her eyes wide to look up into the hideous face of a giant orangutan. Oh, my Lord. Good gracious. Okay. That is let's do a quick little page count. That's, I mean, that does seem like a kind of, we've still got half an hour, though. We'll probably get through another chapter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 29. Yeah, okay. We'll get one more chapter done. One more chapter done. Good gracious. This everything is, it's like a non-stop out of the frying pan into the fire kind of action. It's just no matter what happens, something worse is just waiting around the corner. Okay, so okay, boy, now she's boy. Now she's been captured by a giant orangutan. All right. Because why not? Why not? The wild. Oh, where did they? Actually, is that where they picked up the? Is that where the sailor picked up the orangutan from the murders in the Rue Morgue? Oh, I didn't. Hang on. No, we read. No, it was a Sherlock Holmes story, which was very similar. It was very similar to Murders in the Rue Morgue, about an escaped monkey, escaped orangutan. I'm pretty sure that came from Borneo as well. Maybe Borneo is just well known for orangutans. It might be. I will have to look that up. Actually, I'll have to look it up. Okay. Chapter 11. I am coming. The morning following the capture of Virginia Maxon by Muda Safir, okay, so we're doing flashbacks, okay. Professor Maxon, Von Horn, Sing Lee, and the sole surviving Lascar from the crew of the Ithaca set out across the strait toward the mainland of Borneo in the small boat which the doctor had secreted in the jungle near the harbor. Ah, of course. Of course. And that is so typical. That is so typical of Edgar Rice Burroughs. Just like writing, he doesn't go back and have a little piece where someone had like taken a ship and stored it, taken a little boat and stored it along the shoreline or anything like that. No, he's just like, oh, okay, they need a boat now. Oh, okay, we'll just write that in right here. Now they're in a small boat, which the doctor, oh yeah, he totally had secreted it in the jungle near the harbor. He does that in so many of his books, so many of them. You always just happen to have the right item, just right there, just write it in. Of course, yeah. The party was well equipped with firearms and ammunition, and the bottom of the boat was packed full of provisions and cooking utensils, as are all boats that you just casually leave on the shore. Von Horn had been careful to see that the boat was furnished with a mast and sail. It gets even better. And now, under a good breeze, the party was making excellent time toward the mysterious land of their destination. They had scarcely cleared the harbor when they sighted a ship far out across the strait. Its erratic movements riveted their attention upon it, and later, as they drew nearer, they perceived that the strange craft was a good-sized schooner with but a single short mast and tiny sail. For a minute or two her sail would belly with the wind and the vessel make headway. Then she would come suddenly about, only to repeat the same tactics a moment later. She sailed first this way and then that, losing 1 minute what she had gained from the minute before. Von Horn was the first to recognize her. "Oh, it's the Ithaca," Von Horn. "It's the Ithaca," he said, "and her Dyak crew are having a devil of a time managing her. She acts as though she were rudderless." Von Horn ran the small boat within hailing distance of the dismasted hulk, whose side was now lined with waving, gesticulating natives. They were peaceful fishermen, they explained, whose prahus had been wrecked in the recent typhoon. They had barely escaped with their lives by clambering aboard this wreck which Allah had been so merciful as to place directly in their road. Would the Tuan Bezar be so good as to tell them how to make the big prahu steer? Von Horn promised to help them on condition that they would guide him and his party to the stronghold of Raja Muda Safia in the heart of Borneo. The Dyaks willingly agreed, and Von Horn worked his small boat in close under the Ithaca's stern. Here he found that the rudder had been all but unshipped, probably as the vessel was lifted over the reef during the storm, but a single pintle remaining a single pintle remaining in its gudgeon. A half-hour's work was sufficient to repair the damage, and then the two boats continued their journey toward the mouth of the river, up which those they sought had passed the night before. Inside the river's mouth an anchorage was found for the Ithaca, near the very island upon which the fierce battle between No. 13 and Muda Safia's forces had occurred. From the deck of the larger vessel, the deserted prahu which had borne Bulan across the strait was visible, as were the bodies of its slain Dyaks and the misshapen creatures of the white giant's forces. In excited tones, the headhunters called Von Horn's attention to these evidences of conflict, and the doctor drew his boat up to the island and leaped ashore, followed by Professor Maxon and Singh. Here they found the dead bodies of the four monsters who had fallen in an attempt to rescue their creator's daughter, though little did any there imagine the real truth. About the corpses of the four were the bodies of a dozen Dyak warriors, attesting to the ferocity of the encounter and the savage prowess of the unarmed creatures who had sold their poor lives so dearly. "Evidently they fell out about the possession of the captive," suggested Von Horn. "Let us hope that she did not fall into the clutches of No. 13. Any fate would be better than that." "God give that has not befallen her," moaned Professor Maxon. "The pirates might but hold her for ransom, but should that soulless fiend possess her, my prayer is that she found the strength and means to take her own life before he had an opportunity to have his way with her." "Amen," agreed Von Horn. Sing Lee said nothing, but in his heart he hoped that Virginia Maxon was not in the power of Raja Muda Safia. The brief experience he had had with No. 13 during the fight in the bungalow had rather warmed his wrinkled old heart toward the friendless young giant, and he was a sufficiently good judge of human nature to be confident that the girl would be comparatively safe in his keeping. It was quickly decided to abandon the small boat and embark the entire party in the deserted war prahu. A half-hour later saw the strangely mixed expedition forging up the river, but not until Von Horn had boarded the Ithaca and discovered to his dismay that the chest was not on board her. Far above them, on the right bank, Muda Safia still squatted in his hiding-place, for no friendly prahu or sampan had passed his way since dawn. His keen eyes, roving constantly up and down the long stretch of river that was visible from his position, finally sighted a war prahu coming toward him from downstream. As it drew closer, he recognized it as one which had belonged to his own fleet, before his unhappy encounter with the wild white man and his abhorrent pack, and a moment later his heart leaped as he saw the familiar faces of several of his men. But who were the strangers in the stern, and what was that... what was that Chinese man doing perched there upon the bow? The prahu was nearly opposite him before he recognized Professor Maxon and von Horn as the white men of the little island. He wondered how much they knew of his part in the raid upon their encampment. Bududreen had told him much concerning the doctor, and as Muda Safir recalled the fact that von Horn was anxious to possess himself of both the treasure and the girl, he guessed that he would be safe in the man's hands so long as he could hold out promises of turning one or the other over to him. And so, as he was tired of squatting upon the uncomfortable bank and was very hungry, he arose and hailed the passing prahu. His men recognized his voice immediately, and as they knew nothing of the defection of any of their fellows, turned the boat's prow toward shore without waiting for the command from von Horn. The latter, fearing treachery, sprang to his feet with raised rifle, but when one of the paddlers explained that it was the Rajah Muda Safir who hailed them, and that he was alone, von Horn permitted them to draw nearer the shore, though he continued to stand ready to thwart any attempted treachery, and warned both the professor and Singh to be on guard. As the prahu's nose touched the bank, Muda Safir stepped aboard, and with many protestations of gratitude, explained that he had fallen overboard from his own prahu the night before, and that evidently his followers thought him drowned, since none of his boats had returned to search for him. Scarcely had the Malay seated himself before von Horn began questioning him in the Rajah's native tongue, not a word of which was intelligible to Professor Maxon. Singh, however, was as familiar with it as was von Horn. "Where are the girl and the treasure?" he asked. "What girl, Tuan Beza?" inquired the wily Malay innocently. "And what treasure? The white man speaks in riddles." "Come, come," cried von Horn impatiently. "Let us have no foolishness. You know perfectly well what I mean. It will go far better with you if we work together as friends. I want the girl, if she's unharmed, and I will divide the treasure with you if you will help me to obtain them. Otherwise, you shall have no part of either. What do you say? Shall we be friends or enemies?" "The girl and the treasure were both stolen from me by a rascally Panglima Nanaka," said Muda Safir, seeing that it would be as well to simulate friendship for the white man, for the time being at least. There would always be an opportunity to use a crease upon him in the remote fastness of the interior to which Muda Safir would lead them. "What became of the white man who led the strange monsters?" asked von Horn. "He killed many of my men, and the last I saw of him he was pushing up the river after the girl and the treasure." "If another should ask you," continued von Horn with a meaningful glance toward Professor Maxon, "it will be well to say the girl was stolen by this white giant, and that you suffered defeat in an attempt to rescue her because of your friendship for us. Do you understand?" Muda Safir nodded. Here was a man after his own heart, which loved intrigue and duplicity. Evidently he would be a good ally in wreaking vengeance upon the white giant who had caused all his discomfiture. Afterward there was always the crease, if the other should become inconvenient. At the longhouse at which Barunda and Nanaka had halted, Muda Safir learned all that had transpired, his informants being the two Dyaks who had led Bulan and his pack into the jungle. He imparted the information to von Horn, and both men were delighted that thus their most formidable enemy had been disposed of. It would be but a question of time before the inexperienced creatures perished in the dense forest. That they ever could retrace their steps to the river was most unlikely, and the chances were that one by one they would be dispatched by headhunters while they slept. Again the party embarked, reinforced by the two Dyaks who were only too glad to renew their allegiance to Muda Safir while he was backed by the guns of the white men. On and on they paddled up the river, gleaning from the dwellers in the various longhouses information of the passing of the two prahus with Barunda, Nanaka, and the white girl. Professor Maxon was impatient to hear every detail that von Horn obtained from Muda Safir and the various Dyaks that were interviewed at the first long house and along the stretch of river they covered. The doctor told him that number 13 still had Virginia and was fleeing up the river in a swift prahu. What? Oh, okay. So Dr. von Horn told Professor Maxon that number 13 still had Virginia and was fleeing up the river in a swift prahu. He enlarged upon the valor shown by Muda Safir and his men in their noble attempt to rescue his daughter, and through it all Sing Li sat with half-closed eyes, apparently oblivious to all that passed before him. What were the workings of that intricate celestial brain? None can say. Okay, boy, I guess they're really going with that the inscrutable Chinese trope. But it's so this dude he learns everything. He learns everything, and just doesn't tell anyone. He knows what's he knew when I forgot the name of that one guy that one of the crew of the Lascars, when he was actually meeting with the pirates, he knew that was going on. Didn't tell anyone. Just knew it. Just saw it. What's he gonna do with all this knowledge? I don't know. Oh, okay. Far in the interior of the jungle, Bulan and his 5 monsters stumbled on in an effort to find the river. Had they known it, they were moving parallel with the stream, but a few miles from it. At times it wound in wide detours close to the path of the lost creatures, and again it circled far away from them. As they traveled, they subsisted upon the fruits with which they had become familiar upon the island of their creation. They suffered greatly for lack of water, but finally stumbled upon a small stream, at which they filled their parched stomachs. Here it occurred to Bulan that it would be wise to follow the little river, since they could be no more completely lost than they were now, no matter where it should lead them, and it would at least ensure them plenty of fresh water. As they proceeded down the bank of the stream, it grew in size until presently it became a fair-sized river, and Bulan had hopes it might indeed prove the stream that they had ascended from the ocean, and that soon he would meet with the prahus and possibly find Virginia Maxon herself. The strenuous march of the 6 through the jungle had torn their light cotton garments into shreds, so that they were all practically naked, while their bodies were scratched and bleeding from countless wounds inflicted by sharp thorns and tangled brambles through which they had forced their way. Bulan still carried his heavy bullwhip, while his 5 companions were armed with the parangs they had taken from the Dyaks they had overpowered upon the island at the mouth of the river. It was upon this strange and remarkable company that the sharp eyes of a score of river Dyaks peered through the foliage. The headhunters had been engaged in collecting camphor crystals when their quick ears caught the noisy passage of the 6, while yet at a considerable distance, and with ready parangs the savages crept stealthily toward the sound of the advancing party. At first they were terror-stricken at the hideous visages of 5 creatures, of 5 of the creatures they beheld, but when they saw how few their number and how poorly armed they were, as well as the awkwardness with which they carried their parangs, denoting their unfamiliarity with the weapons, they took heart and prepared to ambush them. What prizes those terrible heads would be when properly dried and decorated! The savages fairly trembled in anticipation of the commotion they would cause in the precincts of their longhouse when they returned with 6 such magnificent trophies. Their victims came blundering on through the dense jungle to where the 20 sleek brown warriors lay in wait for them. Bulan was in the lead, and close behind him, in single file, lumbered his awkward crew. Suddenly there was a chorus of savage cries close beside him, and simultaneously he found himself in the midst of 20 cutting, slashing parangs. Like lightning, his bullwhip flew into action, and to the astonished warriors it was as though a score of men were rained upon them in the person of this mighty white giant. Following the example of their leader, the 5 creatures at his back leaped upon the nearest warriors, and though they wielded their parangs awkwardly, the superhuman strength back the and though they wielded their parangs awkwardly, their superhuman strength back of their cuts and thrusts. The superhuman strength back of their cuts and thrusts sent the already blood-stained blades through many a brown body. The Dyaks would gladly have retreated after the first surprise of their initial attack, but Bulan urged his men on after them, and so they were forced to fight to preserve their lives at all. At last, 5 of them managed to escape into the jungle, but 15 remained quietly upon the earth where they had fallen, the victims of their own overconfidence. Beside them lay 2 of Bulan's 5, so that now the little party was reduced to 4, and the problem that had faced Professor Maxon was so much closer to its own solution. From the bodies of the dead Dyaks, Bulan and his 3 companions, number 3, number 10, and number 12, took enough loincloths, caps, war coats, shields, and weapons to fit them out completely, after discarding the ragged remnants of their cotton pajamas, and now even more terrible in appearance than before, the rapidly vanishing company of soulless monsters continued their aimless wandering down the river's brim. The 5 Dyaks who had escaped carried the news of the terrible creatures that had fallen upon them in the jungle, and of the awful prowess of the white men who had led them. They told of how, armed only with a huge whip, he had been a match and more than a match for the best warriors of the tribe, and the news that they started spread rapidly down the river from one longhouse to another until it reached the broad stream into which the smaller river flowed, and then it traveled up and down to the headwaters above and the ocean far below in the remarkable manner that news travels in the wild places of the world. So it was that as Bulan advanced, he found the longhouses in his path deserted, and came to the larger river, and turned up towards its head without meeting with resistance or even catching a glimpse of the brown-skinned people who watched him from their hiding places in the brush. That night they slept in the longhouse near the bank of the greater stream, while its rightful occupants made the best of it in the jungle behind. The next morning found the 4 again on the march, ere the sun had scarcely lighted the dark places of the forest, for Bulan was now sure that he was on the right trail, and that the new river that he had come to was indeed the same that he had traversed in the prahu with Barunda. It must have been close to noon when the young giant's ears caught the sound of the movement of some animal in the jungle a short distance to his right and away from the river. His experience with men had taught him to be wary, for it was evident that every man's hand was against him, so he determined to learn at once whether the noise he heard came from some human enemy lurking along his trail, ready to spring upon him with naked parang at a moment that he was least prepared, or merely from some jungle brute. Cautiously he threaded his way through the matted vegetation in the direction of the sound. Although a parang from the body of a vanquished Dyak hung at his side, he grasped his bullwhip ready in his right hand, preferring it to the less accustomed weapon of the head-hunter. For a dozen yards he advanced without sighting the object of his search, but presently his efforts were rewarded by a glimpse of reddish, hairy body and a pair of close-set, wicked eyes peering at him from behind a giant tree. At the same instant, a slight movement at one side attracted his attention to where another similar figure crouched in the underbrush, and then a third and fourth and fifth became evident about him. Bulan looked in wonderment upon the strange, man-like creatures who eyed him threateningly from every hand. They stood fully as high as the brown Dyak warriors, but their bodies were naked except for the growth of reddish hair which covered them, shading to black upon the face and hands. The lips of the nearest were raised in an angry snarl that exposed wicked-looking fighting fangs, but the beast did not seem inclined to initiate hostilities, and as they were unarmed and evidently but engaged upon their own affairs, Bulan decided to withdraw without arousing them further. As he turned to retrace his steps, he found his three companions gazing in wide-eyed astonishment upon the strange new creatures which confronted them. Number 10 was grinning broadly, while Number 3 advanced cautiously toward one of the creatures, making a low, guttural noise that could only be interpreted as peaceful and conciliatory. More like a feline purr it was than anything else. "What are you doing?" cried Bulan. "Leave them alone. They have not offered to harm us." "They are like us," replied Number 3. "They must be our own people. I am going with them." "And I," said Number 10. "And I," echoed Number 12. "At last we have found our own. Let us all go with them and live with them, far away from the men who would beat us with great whips and cut us with their sharp swords." "They are not human beings," exclaimed Bulan. "We cannot live with them." "Neither are we human beings," retorted Number 12. "Has not von Horn told us so many times?" "If I am not now a human being," replied Bulan, "I intend to be one, and so I shall act as a human being should act. I shall not go to live with savage beasts, nor shall you. Come with me as I tell you, or you shall again taste the bullwhip." "We shall do as we please," growled Number 10, baring his fangs. "You are not our master. We have followed you as long as we intend to. We are tired of forever walking through the bushes that tear our flesh and hurt us. Go and be a human being if you think you can, but do not longer interfere with us, or we shall kill you." And he looked first at Number 3 and then at Number 12 for approval of his ultimatum. Number 3 nodded his grotesque and hideous head. He was so covered with long black hair that he more nearly resembled an orangutan than a human being. Number 12 looked doubtful. "I think Number 10 is right," he said at last. "We are not human. We have no souls. We are things. And while you, Bulan, are beautiful, yet you are as much a soulless thing as we. That much von Horn taught us well. So I believe that it would be better were we to keep forever from the sight of men. I do not much like the thought of living with these strange, hairy monsters, but we might find a place here in the jungle where we could live alone and in peace." "I do not want to live alone," cried Number 3. "I want a mate, and I see a beautiful one yonder now. I'm going after her." And with that he again started toward a female orangutan, but the lady bared her fangs and retreated before his advance. "Even the beasts will have none of us," cried Number 10 angrily. "Let us take them by force, then." And he started after Number 3. "Come back," shouted Bulan, leaping after the two deserters. As he raised his voice, there came an answering cry from a little distance ahead, a cry for help, and it was the agonized tones of a woman's voice. "I am coming," shouted Bulan, and without another glance at his mutinous crew, he sprang through the line of menacing orangutans. Man, oh man. That was weird. So the final line in that chapter was actually the title of the chapter. That was "I am coming" is the title of chapter 11. All righty. We'll continue with this tomorrow. We'll continue with What time is just past noon right now? Just past noon. But before we go, we was going to end with a short little. It's a short little piece written by Simon Armitage, who's currently the, I believe, the poet laureate of England. Yeah, Baghdad money. Yeah. So today is Armistice Day or Remembrance Day or Veterans Day here in the States. On the 11th day of the 11th month, and on the 11th hour. So that was it was like the official ending of World War One, the Great War, the war so terrible that no more wars would be fought, like that. Yeah, well, yeah, humans are not that good. Anyway, yeah, so this is a short piece which Britain's poet laureate there, Simon Armitage, wrote for this year's Armistice Day. This is about the recovery of the body of the unknown soldier and the creation of its tomb over in Westminster Abbey. I think it's Westminster Abbey. I think it is. Anyway, so that's right. Yeah, so we're just going to end with this, and then we'll be back tomorrow. The Bed by Simon Armitage. Sharp winds scissor and scythe those plains, and because you are broken and sleeping rough in a dirt grave, we exchange the crude wooden cross for the hilt and blade of a proven sword, to hack through the knotted dark of the next world. Yes, but to lean on as well at a stile or gate, looking out over fens or wealds or fells or wolds. That sword, drawn from a king's sheath, fits a commoner's hand, and is yours to keep. And because frost plucks at the threads of your nerves, and your bones stew in the rain, bedclothes of zinc and oak are trimmed and tailored to fit. Sandbags are drafted in, for bolstering limbs and pillowing dreams, and we throw in a fistful of battlefield soil, an inch of the earth, your share of the spoils. The heavy sheet of stone is Belgian marble, buffed to a high black gloss. The blanket a flag that served as an altar cloth. Darkness files past, through until morning, its head bowed. Molten bullets embroider incised words. Among drowsing poets and dozing saints, the tall white candles are vigilant sentries, presenting arms with stiff yellow flames. So nobody treads on the counterpane. But tiptoeing royal brides in satin slippers will dress you and crown you with luminous flowers. All this for a soul without name or rank, or age, or home, because you are the son we lost, and your rest is ours. Yeah. There we go. That brings us to the end. Yeah. We'll be back tomorrow. 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to continue with The Monster Men. Man, that's such a ridiculous book. Okay. So we'll see you then. We will see you then. Have a great day, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow.